lots of familiar faces, but some new ones, so I love seeing you guys. I think Catherine did a great job organizing this. Can we just give Catherine a round of applause? I think Catherine just has a knack of just putting things together. If you don't know that, her background is actually a teacher, you know, and she's applying to medical school this year. You know, she's getting there, but the students, by the way, if you get all those emails, getting your project done, deadline, that's a teacher site coming out, you know, and I'm so grateful to Catherine Chow for organizing this and organizing the students. I'm so grateful to Chloe Williams in the back. This event will be streamed live on Facebook, HPN Facebook, so your presentation, Dr. Corazana, will be live. Anybody in the world can watch it, by the way. You know, this couldn't have been possible without the help of many people. You know, first of all, I want to thank our faculty. Several of them are here. Dr. Borman, Dr. Bag, you know, several of them will be coming in. Dr. Virag, who did your midterm review, and we also have other outside outstanding faculty. David and Mao, you know, and we also want to welcome the patient support group from Jerry, from the Parkinsons Association, and outside physicians, Dr. Kogat, you know, so, and also our patient advocates. You are the reason that we are here today, you know. So I do want to recognize one faculty who have indeed really have really took time to mentor our students. You know, I would like to ask Dr. Ching Lee to stand up, and Dr. Ching Lee has as well has given us during our midterm. They were our speaker, and they were here to inspire the students. So we have a lei for you.
Oh,
Dr. Ching Lee.
Pardon me. Thank you very much. We appreciate everything you've done.
Yes, yes, thank you, thank you. Let's give Dr. Ching Lee a We couldn't have done this without the community, you know, Dr. Ching Lee and some of the faculty here. So, oh my goodness, this is great. You are in for a treat, by the way. One of our goals is to really sow into the students, you know, because you are the future of neuroscience. Because Dr. Bowman and me, we'll be gone, you know, in 20 years. You know, Dr. Corazana will be around, you know. Shingley, you are straight up man, you know, so you guys are the future of neuroscience in Hawaii, you know. So it is our honor, it's our privilege and a pleasure to be part of your journey. You know. So one of our goals is to make sure that you have a good idea of what research is, have a good idea of what neuroscience is, and so you can kind of have a different perspective. You know, people talk about shadowing physicians in the clinic. I think neuroscience is so much more than just seeing patients in the clinic. It's getting to know what's underlying the disease process. It's getting to understand how that affects the patient. You know, it's getting to understand the suffering and the plight that they face daily, and how you can use the talent that you have, the resources that you have, how you can use that to leverage and bring new treatment. I'm very excited because we have some great entrepreneurs here, David and Mao. So this are the future, you know, of neuroscience. One of the faculty that I've invited to speak today is a dear friend of mine. When I came to Hawaii 8 years ago, I was told that you can never do neuroscience research here on the island. Don't even try it. Other people have already tried. You can't do clinical trials. You don't have the right people. You don't have the right facility. It's not going to happen. You know, So Catherine knows me. She knows that if you want something to happen, just tell me it cannot be done. You know, so but it couldn't have been done without the support of a lot of people, especially in Hawaii Pacific Neuroscience, our faculty, you know, our staff. But one person that has really contributed, one of the most to bringing clinical trials and research in Hawaii is none other than the speaker that's going to speak to you. I'm going to introduce Dr. Enrique Carazana. Dr. Carazana served on the board of directors for Mariners. Before that, he was the chief medical officer for Corda Therapeutics, based out of New York, New York. He was responsible for the management of drug development program and regulatory filings. And he travels the world. He works with the FDA. He travels to FDA meet with them. He travels pretty much all over the world. Before Corda, he was the vice president of global hate development for Novartis, based out of Switzerland. Before that, he was the director of Epilepsy Center at University of Miami and associate professor of neurology. Board certified neurologist with 20 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry. Obviously published and presented widely. He had his medical degree from Harvard Medical School and completed his residency in neurology and fellowship at Harvard as well. I know this is a great CV that you have, but more than that, Dr. Carazana, I just want to tell you what a great friend you are to the Hawaii people and to the Hawaii neuroscience community. Without you, a lot of what we're doing, the clinical trials that you guys are working on, many of them started off with Dr. Carazana. Would you put your hands together for
Well, thanks. I have to say I have pride and stage anxiety, and when you mentioned Facebook, I'm speechless now. I had the whole thing prepared for a small crowd, and you mentioned Facebook, worldwide audience, and I'm like going, great, thank you. You should just leave it like that. I forgot my Xanax this morning. Well, it's a great honor to be here, actually, speak to everyone, from the students to the patient groups to fellow colleagues. I kept the title intentionally very simple. It almost looks like I'm writing a book. You know, remember that when you come back to school in grade school, what I did for my summer vacation? That's kind of what the title looks like. And it was done intentionally, by the way. And intentionally because drug development it takes a village, it takes a country, actually. It's extremely complex area. I know just a little bit of it. Even though I managed the process of drug development, involved in a number of companies from the science to arguing with the agency about NEMIA as part of the studies that need to be done. I just know the tip of the iceberg, and I depend on, I would say, hundreds, if not thousands of people that are smarter than me to actually bring a drug into the market to be approved by the FDA. It's a highly complex enterprise. It perhaps may have been simpler 30, 40 years ago, but it's just gotten more and more complex. One of the things I could tell you that, and this is more from the personal side, which many of you guys may not necessarily hear, the professionals that I deal with, everyone that I've encountered, we have a passion to do this because of the patients. And one time I had a discussion with a mentor of mine who said, even if some of us may, he asked the question, we do it for the patients, but who are the patients? That's the question he asked me. Well, we were doing an Alzheimer's project, and this is way back 20 so many years ago, and I said, well, the patients, the Alzheimer's patients, and I said, he asked me, do you take any medications? And back then I was younger, and I said, no, not really. And he said, last week you took any Motrin, Tylenol? I go, yeah, I had a headache. Ah, okay, you were a patient. So if I ask in this room, like, how many of you guys are patients? Everyone will lift their hand and say, I'm a patient. So, and what he meant then, what he wanted to tell me is that we, physicians or professionals in the development of drugs, have an incredible responsibility to develop the best drug possible. If we don't do it just for the patients, we're doing it actually for our families who are patients, and we're doing it for ourselves who we are patients who will be patients. So when I take my Lipitor in the morning for my high cholesterol, I just hope that in Pfizer, I have someone like me who's also thinking about how important it is to make sure that that drug is safe and well done. And I trust that individual, just like when I develop a drug, I'm doing the same thing. So I just want to say that because sometimes we lose the fact that we all professionals were trying to do the best thing possible, and that's lost in the debate about, you know, regulations and money, etc. You know, that often comes to light when you have a couple bad apples that pop up in the news, as you know, from the guy who kind of jacked up the price of a much needed AIDS drug. You know, that's you know, a shame basically. How do I change this?
The arrows on the bottom.
Oh, on the like.
Sideways.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So, you know, the promise of biotech, I work primarily in biotech, in the biotech field. And I give, with very small companies, is primarily who I work with, not necessarily currently. And I advise a number of small companies that are working in projects that have to do mostly with the orphan diseases in the neurology space. And the promise of biotech essentially is, you know, people listen about a molecule that came up from the bench, from Dr. Quinn, you know, like he presented great research on something that potentially could help the tauopathies. You know, my mind was going supranuclear palsy. Your mind was thinking Alzheimer's, right? But I was thinking about the very rare diseases. And many patients with very rare diseases, they have no current options, no current treatments. And they look at the promise of biotech like this drug is gonna happen tomorrow. Like, oh wow, they read the last report, you know, if they were to read Dr. Quinn's work and, you know, in a journal, they will say, oh great, this is the cure that for my disease. And that's gonna happen in the next 3 years or 2 years. And actually the process is very long and very arduous, and that's not necessarily the case. In fact, most of the time what we confront is this. You know, people have this plan that's gonna be beautiful. In fact, just yesterday I was reviewing a document from a small biotech company that an investor was to put money on, and they sent this plan, and look, the plan looked like they were going to develop the drug in literally 2 years, and I had to write back and said, this is far from the truth. This is likely to take 10 years. It's likely going to be faced with tons of setbacks, and with each setback, you either have to regroup back and say, can we move this forward, or is it dead? And you know, and the reality is that most drugs actually die in the process. And people sometimes don't realize this. So if you look at the timelines and the probability of success from a lab, basically, where you have 5,000 compounds, and often they use, currently we're using a lot of techniques to be able to, for example, look at the interaction between a drug or a compound with an enzyme, and actually be able to model the various compounds so that the compounds become even more and more efficient in blocking an enzyme or activating a receptor. But when in the process of doing that, you start changing you start remodeling the compound. Think about a house and you start, or a key, for example. Think of a key and a lock, and you start changing the teeth of the lock, so you get of the key, so you have a better fit and become a more efficient key. You could develop 5,000 of these compounds. At the end, basically, only one of them is going to make it. And it may take you 2 to 10 years to get that lead compound. So it's already, you could end up spending a good 10 years before you actually finally get this molecule. You say, aha, I think this is the one that I'm going to take to the next phase, which is the preclinical work. And in the preclinical work, you actually then test that compound versus animal models. You also look at toxicity, And there is a chance that actually many of these drugs, actually for one reason or the other, in these toxicity models or models for carcinogenicity, you find that it's really a better poison than it is a better therapy. And that dies too. And, you know, it may take you 3 to 5 years or, you know, go through that preclinical process. In fact, one of the companies that I work with, we actually had a very promising compound that looked great in rats. And when we took it to human in vitro models with human cells, nothing happened. And it turned out that the enzyme in the rat was cleaving the molecule in the right way, but the human enzyme didn't cleave it. So therefore, we had nothing. It died, literally. A lot of effort. We even, you know, we had an orphan indication, an orphan designation for the molecule. It just didn't work. And that happens. And again, it's 250 compounds just to get to the end. And if you go to the phase 1, when we first go to humans, and then we start looking at the pharmacokinetics in normal volunteers, phase 8. And when you go to phase 2, when you now look to the product, the compound, how does it work in patients? The attrition rate is now between 8 and 2 compounds. And when you go into the phase 3 program, which is basically where you look at large number of patients with the disease, maybe 2 out of 3 make it at the end, and they get an approval. So think about it, that it takes 15 years more or less, and 5,000 compounds to give you one. And in each one of these points, there's a lot of people that have different expertise that work in, from researchers and in the chemistry department to actually clinical operation and project managers that, you know, that visit Dr. Liao here in the clinic just to make sure that everything is well documented. And there's an incredible amount of regulations and compliance and ethics that go into each one of these phases, including animal ethics, by the way. You think about the IRB, there's an equivalent IRB for animal research. So it's highly complex, a lot of hands go into this. And, you know, I mentioned the costs, and the costs are just getting higher and higher. And for multiple reasons, from inflation to the fact that, you know, if you look even in the 60s, you know, I'll give you an example. Tegretol, carbamazepine, was approved in the early 60s for trigeminal neuralgia, you know, that intense pain in the face. The actual number of patients that were studied was less than 200 patients for that approval. Currently, if we're going to do a drug for epilepsy, like, let's say, Fycompa, you know, the clinical trial of Fycompa probably easily took in excess of 5,000 patients. So you go from a drug getting approved in the 60s with 200 patients to a drug actually currently to get approval having to go through, you know, 5,000 patients. And in addition to that, number of years that it takes. So the costs just keep getting higher. In addition, keep in mind what I mentioned, that 5,000 to 1, every one of those failures increments the cost. And then you start adding up, and you're talking about spending a good $2 billion to develop one drug when it comes to market. Something about this needs to be done, honestly. I don't have a solution, but unfortunately, this is just going to jack up the expenditures, and it's also kind of increases the price. The argument is very convoluted. I really don't want to go into who's right, who's wrong. I take the philosophy of being fair, and we do it for patients, and somehow we need, as a society, to come together to maximize, let's put it this way, maximize what we can do for patients in all angles, from the expenses of the medications to the efficacy of medications to the safety of the medications. Something must be done. This is the way, the trajectory we're having currently, in my opinion, is unsustainable. We're not going to be able to sustain this. So when the students actually become the physicians, it's going to be very hard. It's going to be a big argument, like the price of drugs and what people are spending on drugs and the regulations in drugs. And so something must happen soon to try to tackle this. And I'm just one mind of the many, and so are you guys. But I think together we can solve the issue. How much gets spent on biopharmaceuticals, just to give you an idea, is a lot of money. Significant amount. I mean, it's almost over $100 billion compared to computer equipment, which goes to $65 billion. So the most amount of money is spent in pharmaceutical research, the biopharmaceutical research, compared to any other industry. So the numbers are pretty staggering when you think about it. And on top of that, you know, from the number of medications that get approved, you wonder how many of them actually recoup. Because you already mentioned, well, we spent $2 billion, and how many of them actually recoup their money back? It's only 2 in 10. But obviously, 2 in 10, those two do make a significant amount of money that they're able to overcome the losses from the other one. So at the end, it is a win, but it's a collective win. So think about it, as I often use the analogy, it's almost like if you're playing a poker game with multiple hands. And if you think about yourself playing a poker game with multiple hands, some of your hands are going to lose, some of your hands are going to be even, some of your hands are going to win big. At the end, when you put your whole portfolio of hands, you win a little bit. It's kind of like this is sort of what my financial advisor tells me about my portfolio. You know, I said, why am I only getting 2% gains, right? You know, and I said, why am I getting 2% gains? He said, well, because we're spreading the risk. And think about it the same, you know, in these terms as well. And the cost, you know, the reason costs of medicines are getting higher is greater number of clinical studies are being required. When you have greater number of studies, you're now involving more patients. And I mentioned that in 91 it took an average of 3,500, and just 10 years later, we're talking about an additional 2,000 patients for a study, for approving of a drug. That's significant, actually. That is significant. There are greater complexity of clinical trials. In fact, one of the things that a lot of times in the biotech industry, we work a lot with statisticians to try to come up with novel ways of doing the clinical trial that will actually give you a better answer, a faster result, and at the same time will use less patients. So it's a concept of efficiency. It's almost like, imagine that as a statistician, as a do a clinical trial, that I can throw the dice, but somehow I maneuver the dice that instead of having the faces that it only has 4 faces. So I could get an answer quicker. I could get that number 4 quicker. Is one way of putting it. Because the game is when you're spending so much money, you want to find out early in the process whether this drug is going to move forward or not. So we're trying to get better and better at identifying the drug that is not going to go anywhere. Because remember, we start with the preclinical and we go all the way to the approval. So if we can find out early that this drug is not going to work, we don't have to then move it along and spend the money onto the phase 3 when we find out, oh gee, it didn't work. And you could have said, if I knew that before, I wouldn't have done this amount of testing on it, and save the money that then you could put on for the next drug. In fact, it's funny, the same mentor I had actually told me, he asked me, he was very philosophical, he asked me the question, are you in the business of making drugs? And I said, of course I am. He says, no, you're in the business of killing drugs. You kill more drugs than you approve drugs. And he was absolutely correct. You know, when you see a drug that gets developed in the market, there is a lot of failures behind it. So it's something to keep in mind as well as we think about the process. And last is, you know, there is a lot of greater, you know, regulatory requirements that are being imposed, which is fair, I think. I mean, we want to develop better drugs and we want to develop safer drugs. And to do that, I think it's prudent to have the regulators like the FDA or the European medicines to come in and help us be partners and let us know where to go with this and make sure that we're doing the right thing. And so I'm totally in agreement that regulations are needed. It's a very complex business. Yes.
You know, it seems as if that number 5,500 is truly excessive. and the number of subjects needed to perform the test. What is your personal belief of the number of subjects that would be needed to adequately test it?
So
You've been in this business a long time.
So it depends. It depends a lot on the disease, and there's a lot of factors that play into the number of subjects. I am very involved with rare diseases. For example, one of the companies I sit in the board, Marinus Pharmaceutical, we're actually developing ganaxolone for the treatment of CDKL5. It's a rare genetic epilepsy, where babies start early on with infantile spasms and multiple seizures. They have significant neurodevelopmental delay. There is, right now, if you go to the CDKL5 website, the Patient Association has a website. There's about 1,200 patients identified in the world. So then the question is a good question, how many patients does it take to develop a drug for the CDKL5? If I apply the standards that I use for an epilepsy drug, I don't have enough patients, because I told you that for a drug like Fycompa in epilepsy, I need over 5,000 patients. I only got 1,200 patients identified. If you then do sort of prevalence studies and you do some assumptions, probably in the US there's about 4,000 to 5,000 patients with CDKL5, but of all ages, and many of these patients are who knows where. They're not had genetic testing. So I can go out fishing for them, because these are it's a devastated neurocognitive epilepsy syndrome. Many of these patients are probably already in nursing homes, etc. They out, the parents are no longer there, they no longer have caregivers, the wards is at stake, and no one really has to have an interest to identify them. So we can only rely on the newly diagnosed patients, and that's basically a very, very tiny group of patients. Now, if you talk to me about a disease, let's say, like panic disorder, or anxiety, or depression, 25% of, a quarter of this room somewhere along their lifetime is going to be depressed. If you take depression, the numbers then are staggering. And then you need to say to yourself, I need to ensure the safety of the drug, because I got so many people that are going to be taking the drug that potentially something can go wrong. So then, what are the numbers? I think the numbers to me are, the data will let me know more or less how many numbers, but I think you need a good safety database. So there's not I guess I'm getting, to answer the question more succinctly, there isn't a right number. Every number depends on the disease and the trials. So the question is it worth the wait, right? I'm telling you, it takes 15 years to develop a drug. It takes $2.5 billion to develop a drug. It takes the efforts and the time of a lot of people, but more important, it takes patience. It takes the patients to participate, and we owe a lot to the patients. People put time, right? Borman, patients participate in your Alzheimer trials, caregivers bring their patients, they have all those visits, they go through all those scales. It's quite a burden sometimes. So there's a lot of patients that participate in these trials, and the question is worth the wait. So just going to show some statistics that I think the pharmaceuticals may be in part contributed to this, not altogether, but in 1950, the average lifespan of a male and female in the United States, and if you compare it to nowadays, there's a 10-year difference. So we are actually living longer, but not only are we living longer, we're also living longer with better quality of life. It's funny, but 2 days ago, I was doing one hike. Dr. Liao knows I like to hike, and was in Coco Head, and there was this 70-year-old Japanese tourist that was hiking by himself. 70-year-old. He was kicking my butt, actually. He was doing that Coco Crater back up and down those stairs like it was no tomorrow. I was sweating and puffing. But he actually told me a story. He said he came to Hawaii for the past 2 weeks, and he said, oh, it was great. I even did skydiving. So, you know those skydivers when you go Makapu'u and you see the hiteta, and I'm like, oh wow, it's unbelievable. But that speaks to the quality of life that elderly folks are having nowadays. So, you know, 60 is the new 18. You know? And I think a lot of that has to do with pharmaceuticals, right? There is a certain quality of life that comes in. So there's some progress that certainly has been done. Likewise, if you look at the decline in death rates, you know, there's a significant amount of decline in death due to some of the chronic diseases. Liver disease, this is from 2011, but as you know, they just came out with new medications for hepatitis C, cures for hepatitis C that before wasn't one of these silent killers, essentially. And the new drugs that came out can potentially, it has a very high probability of essentially eradicating the virus. And it actually created a very interesting debate because when these first drugs came out, the price tag was $100,000. And you say, well, they're preventing a death, they're preventing a transplant. So from the health economist perspective, they saw it as they could justify the price. But from a society perspective, and from a payer, from an insurance company, they were screaming because every patient that has hepatitis C now becomes a candidate to take the drug, which means that me as a payer, as an insurance company, I'm going to have a whole full room of people that I have to pay this amount of money. I just can't. I'm going to go bankrupt. So this became a big debate. How do you deal with this? Why you would justify the price of it? 100,000 may be excessive, and 100,000 can break the backs of the system. I don't have an answer for you, but I come from the spirit of fairness, and there should have been some element of fairness built into it. And I think there was some naive health economics person who went into it thinking, gee, 100,000 can be justified. No one thought about, you gotta treat everyone at once, because that's what the drug does, it's a cure, right? One of the things that is not mentioned here is HIV, AIDS, right? So I started medicine in the 80s. In fact, my attendee when I was an intern was Margaret Fischel, who discovered was the leading author of ACT, the first drug for HIV. It maybe extended life of the patients by 3 or 4 months. For those who were in that area, it was 3 or 4 months at best. Then the DDC came out, DDI came out, and then by the time when I was in practice in Miami in the 90s, I was seeing a bulk of HIV patients. I was seeing still cryptococcal meningitis, toxoplasma, Kaposi sarcoma, and I remember in 1994, around 95, 96, all of a sudden I saw no more HIV patients in my practice. As a neurologist, no one was referring to me. And I remember like the 6 months, I called Jeremy, who had a big HIV practice, who used to refer me a lot of patients. I said, you haven't sent me any patients. You guys got upset at me for some reason? And, and physicians know, right, that we depend on our referrals and your consultants. And I said, what happened? You go, oh no, we are now doing the heart therapy. And all their T-cell counts have responded. And people are fine. No one's getting any of these strange infectious diseases anymore. They don't need you. And in fact, it's true. And that happens because of pharmaceuticals. And new drugs are coming out in which the side effects of the first generation have been eradicated. So we need to give some credit where credit is due. I mean, this is, good things. On the other hand, the United States pays a premium price for all these medications. Is it fair? I will probably say not quite, right? When other countries pay less. So, I mean, again, it's the spirit of fairness. We have to sit down together at a table and try to come up with as to how to do this right. So this is sort of some statistics. So the new therapies probably account for about 3/4 of the reasons of our life expectancy. Whole Foods probably says that the other quarter belongs to them. People are now hearing, non-GMO veggies nowadays. That was a bad joke. Well, academia. Some of us are in the faculty. In fact, when I was at Novartis, I was still in the faculty at University of Miami. So I have a deep respect for the industry, for academia, and two different, chips in a way. I mean, one has a lot of money, obviously. One, moves, with a very complex structure, and the other one, is a small little money, a small little boat with, depends on the wind and, and grants and, right? We talked about that. When I visited his lab, we spent a good amount of time talking about grants and grant money and the difficulties of it. And each one of us have different perspective of one another, academics, and especially nowadays, the argument has gotten really more heated. The way academia views industry, this kind of cartoon kind of illustrates that. You got an academic who actually discovered the cure of everything, and then you got the business type that tells you, the typical business reply: we committed only to products that have huge markets and provide absolutely no benefit to humankind. That's the way they're looking at it. And there are probably samples of products in the pharmaceutical world like that, honestly. Some of the cosmetic products, perhaps. But that's to be argued. On the other hand, industry sometimes looks at academia as very exterior. We often get proposals from looking at things that are very interesting from one perspective, but from the perspective of an industry, this should be more for a grant for NIH because we don't see the commercial value for it. Perhaps one could argue that industry can be unimaginative sometimes. Especially when you start prioritizing your portfolio of programs. But the reality is they need each other. I mean, as I mentioned, it takes a village or it takes a whole city actually to develop a drug, and a lot of the work starts in a lab. Most of the drugs that I'm working with currently, they actually started in someone's lab, in an academic lab. They did not start in a big pharmaceutical research center. That didn't happen. They started in someone's lab, in a test tube, someone mixing and or looking at the effect of a compound in a rare disease and finding out, gee, this works. What do we toy around with this compound? What happens? That whole very down-to-earth, low-key, single person approach in a bench, to be honest with you. And yet the idea starts taking hold and you start saying, gee, I think I could get you folks to work with this and move it forward. So academia could use the support, obviously, financial support. And also they can use the freedom to operate. On the other hand, industry, does want control. They want to develop, drugs that are going to be, in one way or another, a commercial success, because it's not necessarily a not-for-profit. It's a very complex debate, and I'm just sort of kind of hitting on some points. And I'm sure that in this room, if we open it for argument, and luckily we don't have any weapons, everybody will walk out alive, but there'll be probably like 100 different opinions, because everybody will have a completely different opinion on the argument. And I mentioned biotech versus big pharma, and I don't know if people familiar with what the term biotech and big pharma is, what big pharma is. Big pharma is the Pfizers and the Novartis and the Mercks and the Glaxo. Those are the big pharma. They're big enterprises. They have a legacy of compounds. And then you have the biotech, which usually tend to be virtual. A lot of them, when they start, tend to be virtual. We do the business all on the phone. We have a compound. We contract folks to do the work. We go to our labs. Can you do this for me? And they do the experiment. Can you do this experiment? We do this experiment. And then we go through multiple investors trying to raise money to do the work. Early on, you depend on sort of what they call angel investors, which are folks that have sometimes are just a patient. You know, one of the drugs I work with, is the parent of a child with a disease, and he is the angel. He basically said, "How much money do you guys need?" And he just wrote the check. You know, which is unbelievable when you say, you know, the guy is basically willing to write that check, and a big check. I mean, relatively big check. To start this early work, to trigger this, because he has an interest in developing a cure for this orphan disease that was only, you know, 2,000 kids worldwide. But it's this child, right? And you find this a lot in the biotechs. You find a lot of the biotechs, that's what happens. Small little diseases and even patients cooperating, and there seems to be a big bond between the patients and the biotechs, and and working together, and that's, I think, very important. And again, these are some of the things that happens that I kind of hit on us already, like the conflict of interest with investigators, company, university. Patents is our big issue. You know, a patent gives you the guarantee that what you're developing is not going to later going to be stolen. And in the pharmaceutical industry, patents are very, very important. Because it's the only way, basically, that you could sort of require your investment. Otherwise, someone will then copy what you did and basically put out with, put a competing product with very little expenditure. You know, it's kind of like someone came in with a clone Apple phones and just disregarded all of Apple's proprietary efforts or the intellectual property that put it on the phone. Someone just basically copies it and comes out with instead of the apple, the orange, and then they sell the orange for $10 because obviously they didn't spend any money in developing the orange. It's just completely a copy. So something to keep in mind, actually. So I'm gonna go back and say why to what I kind of initially touched on this. The reason we do this is for the patients. And if I want to tell the students something is if you go into research, keep in mind that you're doing this for you, for the patients. And that should be in the heart of everything that you do. And therefore you gotta do the research with incredible integrity, respect to the data, respect to your peers, to your patients, etc. So at the end you get the best outcome possible. And again, I just want to thank you guys for having me here, Dr. Liao. Thank you very much. And something are there anyone comments, questions? Anyone wants to ask anything?
I just want to share for our young audience interested in research that it takes a long time, like you've said, but it can be very rewarding. In my undergraduate work, I started studying a molecule called IL-3. It turned out to be granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor, and sure enough, 10 to 15 later, you have products like Neupogen that are helping cancer patients. Took a long time, but I have a real sense of pride that I was able to contribute that doing the bench research.
And you're one of the persons that contribute on it, so that's fantastic. Yeah.
So it can happen.
It can happen, yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wonderful talk. Will you be able to, elaborate further of the synergistic effect among the collaboration between university, industry, and clinics, particularly those young potential.
Sure. So there's a lot of synergies that happen, right? There's a lot of synergies. So, one of the synergies, to give you an example, like I know you yourself are working on the tauopathies, you have a compound, and the question is, how do you go to the next level when you know that NIH grants are so competitive? I mean, the percentages of NIH grants that are getting funded nowadays are what, 2% or less, right? So it means that you have 2 out of 100 chances, or 1 in 50 chances of getting some more money that would allow you to move to the next level. But that amount of money may be not that big, right? It's small, so it may only get you so far. It's almost like someone puts like a gallon of gas in your car, and you say, but how do you go from, you know, Honolulu to Haleiwa? I'm not gonna make it. You say, well, you know, all I can do is give you a gallon of gas. The biotech environment with the investors can come in and say, look, we really like the work you're doing. It's a disease, this could target a disease like supranuclear palsy, and I'm willing to find an investor who's gonna put money behind you, that is gonna get you to a phase where you can then get the drug to like that IND phase, in which then allows it to go into human studies. Then when you get down to that, you need patients now, and that's where, you know, in that case of a dementia like supranuclear palsy, you got Dr. Borman who can then help, and she has the patients. And now there's going to be a discussion between us as to, I need you to have access to the patients, because the industry doesn't have access to the patients. The industry doesn't have clinics. You do. So you're the one who can then do the research. So you can imagine how this gets very, very complex. You know, and then we put you guys together. And many times the researcher also happens to be the clinician who then gets involved in the research. But the question is there a conflict of interest? Because you have a stake on the success of your drug, so you may want to be detached from it. So you can see how this gets very, very, very convoluted. But yes, there's a lot of synergies that happen. That's just an example.
No, to address what a very interesting point you made about the unsustainability of the current model.
Yeah.
I think one of the underlying assumptions there is that every drug has to be a cell surface receptor antagonist or agonist, or an enzyme binder or something like that, as opposed to, and this is something I've mentioned for all the researchers, potential researchers as well, is that we need to look at the system, the overall system, and see where we can interact in the overall system, as opposed to looking way downstream. I'll give you a couple examples. The biggest selling drugs in the world today are Humira, Adderall, and Remicade.
Yes.
Yeah, they're anti-inflammatories, but they work on TNF alpha, which is way downstream in the NF-kappa B pathway. What if we could interact with the NF-kappa B pathway far upstream?
Sure.
And have an impact on dozens of inflammatory cytokines, IL-1, IL-6, COX-1, COX-2, prostaglandin E2, TNF-alpha, etc., with one compound that acts earlier, or that acts in the earlier stages of inflammation. And to think that way, and then you can look at trying to prevent pathological activation of inflammation.
Right.
As opposed to shutting down TNF-alpha all day, every day, which is what these drugs do.
No, absolutely. And actually, even what you said is correct. And in fact, there is now, with this whole genetic thing, there are people who are looking in now as to, and we're basically at a fetal stage, not even at the infancy, we're at a fetal stage here, of can we incorporate DNA and change the DNA altogether? Because a lot of these diseases are genetically mediated. So people are beginning, there are some small companies out there that are looking at how do we get a piece of DNA into the human genome and able to actually correct the defect. Because a lot of these diseases are genetically based, like take Rett syndrome, for example, and one of these sort of neurodevelopmental disorders of childhood is a problem with the MECP2 gene. Can we interfere there? Can we go in and replace it? So that would be the key, which is really working upstream. It's working right at the source.
And given that we now understand that inflammation plays such a ubiquitous role in so many chronic diseases, trying to take the approach we use for hepatitis C or any of those drugs, which is really try to bind to something and break it.
Right.
Make sure it doesn't work anymore. That's the HIV model. That's the hepatitis C model.
The target model.
It's the target model. It's the target model. That's a fundamentally flawed, I would say, fundamentally flawed strategy for chronic disease, because what you do in many of these cases is try,
Sure.
still looking at a target like TNF alpha. And so if you shut down TNF alpha on a regular basis, you can have inherent side effects. Whereas if you can work further upstream, like my company and what we're doing, that where you don't have the side effects, but you have maybe equivalent efficacy as steroids or the TNF alpha inhibitors.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Questions for Dr. Corazano?
I was just going to add to excellent talk.
No, thank you.
I mean, spot on. After spending almost 2 decades in the pharmaceutical industry as well with one of the companies you mentioned, and then now in the biotech space, I can see what you were painting a picture for us. With this talk, has Novartis or any big pharma companies utilized you and bring you into influencing healthcare plans? Because that was one of my roles, is in the pharmaceutical industry working with big health plans.
Yeah, so I used to do that in my prior role with Accord Therapeutics as the CMO. I dealt a lot with the plans and, kind of, highlighting the benefit of the drug and the health economic benefits of the drug, and also, develop models that could allow them to ease the cost of the medication. When I actually, going back to my Novartis years when I was based in Mexico, we had some cutting edge drugs that obviously for the market, for a country like Mexico, Latin America, they're affordable to a segment of the population. When you go down to that 90% of the population, which is really poor, it's unaffordable. So we came up with novel ideas in which, we had what is novel ideas in terms of what is cost sharing. So it's kind of like the concept of putting your money where your mouth is. So it's almost guaranteeing, like if the clinical trial said that this drug is going to prevent fractures, let's say, if you have a fracture, I will reimburse you the cost of the medicine and the cost, and give you back the cost of the fracture. So it's almost like saying, it's kind of like if Volkswagen guarantees that this car is not going to have a flat tire, you buy it because of that. But then let's suppose that in fact one of the cars have a flat tire. Volkswagen says, well, not only am I going to pay for the cost of the flat tire, I'm also going to pay for the cost of the drug of the car, because you bought my car with the idea that it was not going to have a flat tire. It's the same idea. You bought my drug, and you said, well, this drug is going to prevent fractures. So if I get a fracture, shouldn't you give me the money back? It's like that concept of the Kinsa knife, money back guarantee, the knife fails. So these are concepts that we came up to try to, make it more, more affordable, but also make sure that the medicines have access. On the other hand, a lot of the companies have programs for where patients cannot afford a medication that is provided to them. And in the third world, a drug like, for example, thinking about my years at Novartis, Gilenya, which is a life-saving drug for leukemia, very expensive, obviously, but in some countries, most of the patients were getting it for free. Where 99% of the patients with CML were getting Gilenya for free. So, yeah.
I just want to add that more pharmaceutical companies should bring people on like you, or you should be working for all the pharma companies. And reaching out to healthcare plans, because sometimes they're penny wise, pound foolish. And this way you can bring on the concept of prevention wellness for overall healthcare, production of healthcare spend.
If I were to say, your question actually raised a very interesting, thought in my mind, which is like, if I were to tell something to the students, because some of them may actually one day take a role like mine, is I would say, try to be fair, in the spirit of fairness. So one of the things probably my parents taught me, and my grandfather taught me, was a good businessman, says, you want to be fair in a business. If the other party is happy, you're going to be more happy. It's not a question of who trumps who. Sorry, I didn't. See the perils of being live on Facebook? I didn't mean to say that, right? But yeah, you want to be fair. And I think that in this discussion, we all have to be fair. Because, people invest money, they expect some return. Patients put their lives at risk. They want the drug to come forward, right? Dr. Leal, you do a lot of work and research. You expect some remuneration for it, So everybody puts time and effort in the spirit of fairness. People that should take something out of the pot. It shouldn't be one-sided. And that would be my answer to that would be my advice to the students, but also to my fellow pharmaceutical executives. Be fair. That's what. After all, you are a patient. If you don't think you are a patient now, you will be a patient. So you want people to be fair. So again, thank you very much.
We cannot be more pleased with having Dr. Corazana here. What a great resource, and what a great gift he is to our island, isn't he? Let's give Dr. Corazana. I think your concept is well received. Whatever that we're doing, we're looking for, I guess the word maybe is win-win solution.
There you go.
So win for the industry, win for the academia, win for the doctors. But one of the biggest players that should really win is really the patient. And like Dr. Corazana said to the students, as you move into this medical field, that should be a motivating factor. That should be the reason that you wake up every morning. And you can ask Ben, you can ask David why they wake up and go to the lab every day. They're looking to help the patient. One of the biggest component of this win-win solution the patient has to be part of it. So in the spirit of that, we're very fortunate this morning to have one of our patient advocates here with us, who is participating in one of our Parkinson's trials. And I would thank you so much for taking time to be here. And the reason that we have incorporated your story, what you want to say, I wanted to give you a chance to speak to the students. This is the future of neuroscience in Hawaii, and they're not going to get away today without listening to you, so I'll let Catherine take over.
My participation in this clinical trial. This is the first time I volunteered for a clinical trial involving a new medication. I was too chicken before, afraid of drugs and surgery. I was living in a delicate balance of types of medication which supplemented cinnamon, the main reliable yellow pill. Over the past 25 years with young onset Parkinson's, there were downhill periods. Every time, I was rescued by St. Bernard in the form of a new medication to supplement the cinnamon. A lot of human guinea pigs who volunteered for clinical trials are to be thanked for these new drugs. 9 of them helped me keep going, each pill to be left behind one by one as their side effects took hold. They didn't bring a cure, but they gave me independence, 25 more years than we expected when I was diagnosed in 1990. This trial is focused on what was once thought impossible, addressing balance and other problems as off periods become longer when the cinnamon wears off. There has been no gold standard treatment for smoothing out those on times. I'm riding this on and off roller coaster, good hours and bad hours, not good days and bad days. What this trial involves: taking pills to see if they're effective. They've already gone through the phase 2 FDA safety certification. 6 office visits spread out over almost a year. Just before the visits, logging in every half hour for 72 hours. For sleep, off, on with no dyskinesia, on with non-troubling dyskinesia, on with troubling dyskinesia. What I'm learning from being on the trial. Whether or not there's a pattern how my daily roller coaster works, what things affect the on and off, up and down nature of it. How to recognize what effect the pills are having on me. Example, I'm sleeping more soundly at night and wake up less frequently. It could be the pill or maybe something else. I don't know. Another example, I thought the pill was a cause of 24 hours of gastric distress, but then remembered it probably was the fault of the chef's pizza the day before. The patience and quality of the researchers make this a memorable experience. Watching their attention to detail and accuracy makes me appreciate the value of scientific research. Dr. Paul patiently walks me through the meaning of off. I'm sure this is helping me continue to be on for much longer.
It's over. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as a community, as a group, as a physicians, as a representative community, we want to thank you for being willing to be part of a clinical trial, because without patients, participants, we would never be able to do the clinical trial. We would never be able to move progress forward, move science forward. And along with that, I also want to thank our clinical trial team here at the Clinical Research Center. We have Ashley Chandler, the back there, who is our coordinator, and Dr. Paul here. Dr. Paul is not here yet, and Ms. Catherine Chow is our clinical research assistant. So they are the one who really runs this trial. So again, Mary, we thank you as a community for your sacrifice, for taking the time to be here. So we're going to take a break, but before the students, we want you to go out there because we want to take a picture with you, and we want to take a picture with the faculty.